Hi everyone, and welcome to the Imagining a New We video blog with me, Dr. Samantha Petrera, a video series designed to help history teachers and other history educators teach history in ways that are more meaningful, transformative, and inclusive for their students. One of the first pandemic pedagogy conversations I had was with Dr. Sean Carleton. Dr. Sean Carleton is a historian in settler indigenous relationships, and he reminded us in that video that colonialism does not stop just because the pandemic has started. And it was really an important for us to remember the centrality of nation-to-nation relationships and how we are going to rebuild after COVID. However, he also mentioned that after the Spanish flu, for example, people did mobilize in new ways. And he said, remember, the Winnipeg General Strike was integrated in that history. And I didn't remember that. But I also remember that Sean is part of the Graphic History Collective, something I've talked about in another video I did on teaching labor issues in elementary schools, because Ontario was going through a teacher strike in the winter. And so I was thinking of the Graphic History Collective's 1919 graphic novel about the Winnipeg General Strike. And in fact, when I was rereading it yesterday, there's this one page that references the flu. Oh, you can't see it here, but I will show it right here. That references the flu. And so I was like, you know what, I want to bring Sean back. I want to talk just about the graphic novel and how important it is to re-engage the history of the Winnipeg General Strike, especially because this is the 101th anniversary of the beginning of the Winnipeg General Strike. So let's go over to Sean and talk a little bit about this fantastic graphic novel. Sean, hello. Thank you for coming back to talk with me, but also especially to talk about the 1919 graphic novel that I think is even more pertinent and important for us to be reading and thinking about now. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
So when we talked before, we didn't really talk about your work with the Graphic History Collective. Can you tell us a little bit about the Graphic History Collective as a way to segue into 1919.
Yeah, the Graphic History Collective is sort of a side project that got out of control.
As they do.
As they tend to do, right? So the Graphic History Collective is a grassroots group of artists, activists, and academics. And what we do is we combine art and history to connect people to the lessons of the past. We started in Vancouver in 2008, and we now have members in Calgary, Vancouver Island, Haida Gwaii, and we work with a network of artists across the country and internationally. And as you can see on the screen that you're sharing, we've produced 4 graphic novels, graphic histories so far, as well as a number of other projects. Here you can see our Canada Council supported poster project called Remember, Resist, Redraw. And overall, our work in the Graphic History Collective is trying to combine history, education, hope, and activism. And our work generally tries to show people that you don't need a cape and a pair of tights to change the world. So that's sort of what the Graphic History Collective is doing, and people can check out graphichistorycollective.com for all the work that we're doing.
I think that a lot of my work does advocate for using graphic histories to help teach and learn history, because I think that the visualization of certain elements of history make it so much more impactful, which is why I've always really loved the work that you're doing. Can you talk about why we should be reading 1919 right now in particular?
Yeah, well, I think that the Winnipeg General Strike is a kind of iconic moment in Canadian history. A lot has been written about the strike from different perspectives. And I think it's a really rich opportunity to dig into historical sources, how history gets made and revised. But in our current moment, I think revisiting the Winnipeg General Strike is particularly pertinent because moments of social upheaval, strikes, waves of activism often follow major events like pandemics. So 100 years ago, in 1918, 1919, with the influenza flu pandemic, that pandemic did a lot of what we are seeing right now, which is showing people how society functions or doesn't function, the inequalities that exist between rich and poor in capitalist societies. And in that pandemic, people really came out of it with a genuine desire to try and find ways to work together and to dream of a better future. And one of the ways that played out in the city of Winnipeg was demanding workers' rights. And historians like Stilt Jones caution us against drawing a straight line between the pandemic and the general strike. She does make an argument that the lessons of solidarity and working together and showing Winnipeggers that they weren't all in the same boat, right? Rich people could afford better care. I think those are the lessons that we're learning right now in the current pandemic. And as we start to dream of what a post-pandemic world will look like, I think that labor activism and ensuring that people have a better life will absolutely be something that is going to be put on the table and will have to be fought for. We see in the current pandemic that the most essential workers in society are often sometimes the most marginal, the less well off in terms of their wages, their working conditions, their safety. And if we post-pandemic want a better world, we're going to have to fight for it. And I think that the 1919 Winnipeg General Strike shows us it's certainly not a model for victory, because in fact, the Winnipeg General Strike is defeated by the state and capital in a very repressive way, basically sending in the Northwest Mounted Police to crack heads on Bloody Saturday. But I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn about how we work together, the importance of solidarity, the importance of making connections between different groups in society that sometimes, even in 1919, they did making those connections between working class people as well as indigenous people. Who controls the labor movement, who is represented, who often gets left out. I think those are the kinds of questions we should be asking now, and I think that learning about 1919 can help us.
Yeah, I really enjoyed going back to read it after our last conversation, because it really helped me think about past and present in a different way, because we're in this moment of crisis, and I think a lot of us want to think about ways we can build a better future from this. One of the things that you might know that I like to talk about is stuff about historical empathy and the ways that things like movies and creative nonfiction, but also graphic novels, like also just graphic representations of histories are so important. And so I look at the artwork for this work, and I just find it just takes my breath away about how evocative it is, and how you can't help but be in there and think about it in such contextual ways. Why did you and the other members of the Graphic History Collective feel like the Winnipeg General Strike was a good subject to turn into a graphic novel, a graphic narrative?
Yeah, we call them graphic histories.
Graphic history.
They're, or we could just, kind of cut the pretension and call it comics. That's what they really are, right? Graphic novels are really just comics. And I think, one of the reasons why we thought the Winnipeg General Strike, was worthy of that kind of coverage is that because many of the issues haven't really changed. They have, but the kinds of inequality that we see, the kinds of tensions in society that were being worked out in the streets of Winnipeg and parks of Winnipeg are very similar to the kinds of struggles that we're seeing in society today. So we often have this kind of Whiggish notion, that things will get better over time, right? That the Winnipeg General Strike happened, we got trade union rights, and things have gotten better. And I think there certainly are elements of improvement, but in terms of class relations, class inequality, poverty, 2019 and 2018, when we were making the book, there were a lot of parallels, and we felt that people need to understand the kind of connections between the past and present if we're going to try, in our current conjuncture, to try and push for a better world, to try and improve the lives of working people. We need to draw on the lessons of the past. That's why labor history, we think of it as a resource, right? It's something that can show us how people in the past have fought for a better world, where they were successful and where they failed. And we can use those lessons as we try and figure out what we can do differently to bring about better results in the present. So we've really felt that a graphic history treatment of the Winnipeg General Strike would allow people to learn about the past, but also, not to go into the weeds too much, but the graphic novel, the comics medium is a bit different than a film, is different than a novel, right? It requires readers to be more active, to interpret the kind of limited amounts of text and images that are being presented, to interpret and make sense of the story, right? The comics reader is part of the medium. It's necessary. You have to engage with it to propel the narrative forward. And as a result, it's you have to invest more in reading a graphic history. And we thought that it would be a wonderful vehicle for historical empathy and connection. That if we wanted people to learn from the lessons of the past, what better way than to try and put them in the streets of Winnipeg on Bloody Saturday and have them feel what it might have felt like to be attacked by the Northwest Mounted Police, when you're in a silent parade, trying to stand up for workers' rights. So that's why we thought that the Winnipeg General Strike deserved a graphic history.
And the art is so beautiful, and like I said, so evocative, and you really can feel the movement of so many of these scenes. And I find it such a valuable teaching tool. I recommend it whenever possible. So how can people get it? How can people get 1919? How can people support the work of Graphic History Collective for their classrooms, but also for their own learning?
Yeah, a couple points. First, just very briefly on the art. The art, the credit really needs to go to the artist David Lester. The Graphic History Collective has worked very closely with David over the years. He's a wonderful friend, a legend in the punk scene. He's a member of Mecha Normal, which is a very influential punk band in the Pacific Northwest. And his art style really lended a lot to that kind of empathetic connection. It really was a pleasure to work with someone like David. And he's, very prominent on social media, on Twitter, Instagram, so you can follow his work. And in terms of actually picking up copies of the book, we support radical bookstores, independent bookstores. All of them will be able to order in the book. You can get it from the big corporate sites, which we won't necessarily plug. But 1919 in English is available from Between the Lines Press. That's who published it. We've also recently published a French edition. So educators in French can also dig into this. And if there are any German speakers out there, it's also been translated into German and is available through Bauhaus Books in Europe. So support your local independent radical bookstores, independent presses like Between the Lines Press. If you have to support the corporate sites, they're available there too. And if you ever want to have a member of the Graphic History Collective come into your classroom, talk about comics and history, you can find our contact on our website, graphichistorycollective.com.
And we'll put the information for the Graphic History Collective below the video, as well as David Lester's contact information. And I'll pull out the information about the educational talks so that teachers in particular know exactly where to go to be able to get that information. Thank you so much, Sean. I really appreciate you making the connection in the other video and then coming back for us to talk about this, because I think it is important that we are rediscovering some of our narratives about this, right? Like to be able to make those links, because we are reconsidering so many things right now. So thank you so much. The book is great. I can't wait to read it again. And thank you.
Thanks, Samantha. Much appreciated.
See you later.
Okay, bye.
Bye.